Yeah, my position, I'm employed as a community service coordinator here. For the community support service, we're funded through FAXIA, which is through the government and its families, housing, community services, and Indigenous affairs. Community support services were initially set up after the government abolished the former CDE program, which was sort of the work for dole program. Basically, the CSS services that we have today, they were to help help our people, or the Indigenous focused service. So it's specifically designed or specifically developed to help our people reconnect with community, about helping close that gap, and that's one of the predominant focuses of the service, is to help close the gaps in the Indigenous community. Well, Moree in particular, where I live and born and bred, we've got a fantastic network of Indigenous services in the community, and I think that's a real big plus for this community that I'm proud of and proud to be a part of. We've got a really great network of Indigenous services that work well with mainstream as well. And I think that that's a real important key for any Indigenous community to have, is to have that connection with mainstream services, because mainstream are there as well, particularly focused on similar things, like if it's, for instance, in Close the Gap, they've got a agenda too, to make sure that they follow through on those things. I'm 40 years of age now, and I guess within my period of growing up as a young fella and to where I am now, I've had my ups and downs, and I've certainly experienced some things during that time. For example, from a historical perspective, going back to when I was young, my mother and father, my mother comes from the mission here, and it's always good to sit down with your parents and find out about what sort of things and issues they went through as young children growing up on the mission, and even my father. And just hearing some of them stories, and a classical one which probably nearly all of Australia is aware of, is the Freedom Rides, which Charlie Perkins brought to Moree. Those buses of the uni students coming here and helping. That was a big, significant impact in Aboriginal history. As I was saying, the Freedom Rides back in the early 70s or late 60s. I was only born in 1970. I didn't know much about it, obviously, at that time, but learning about it as I've become older, you can see where, if we look back at those people that experienced that, it makes you feel proud of what we've come to accomplish over, in the last 30, 40 years. Without those people, I guess, hitting the government, marching, those sort of things, and rallying for Indigenous rights for all of us, we mightn't be where we are today. And I think that's a really great accomplishment. Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think there's a long way to go for whether we can really witness some change in our communities. At the moment, there's a lot of emphasis by the government on closing the gap, and I think that's fantastic. And but certainly there needs to be a lot more done in small communities. If we're talking about changing communities, I think the important focus of that is to really get back to our grassroots and meeting with people. Like consultation is a key word in this process, is about meeting with the elders, asking them, what are the differences now that they see? What are the things that are impacting on their communities? For me personally, I see, education is always a key, especially for our young people, because as you're probably aware, the Indigenous population is, the elders that we have, it's getting lower and lower. So for our kids to make an impact in the future, education, we really have to, come together as one community, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and really focus on that. It's otherwise, the gap is gradually going to slip away. I mean, if we talk about closing the gap, if we don't sort of emphasise the importance of education to our children, Because education, it leads to a lot of things. It leads to employment, it leads to, a lot of the social things that impacted on Indigenous lives, like housing, the whole lot, employment, health, the whole lot. We all talk about the holistic things in life, those sort of things. So, if we can stem it into our kids, that education is probably the main key in this, then I think that's where, we need to focus on.